morning, all you believers. Well, it's morning where I am right now. Good morning, you believers, non-believers, unaffiliated believers, sort of believers. Glad to have you with me. You think I'm a believers? You're welcome too. My non-university unstudents, welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor. I'm your caster of the thinking pod. I'm your you guru. Please come on in, have a sit. This is episode number 7 in my series on the Christian graces, and some of you Christians listening today may be surprised to know that righteous law is grace. Law done rightly protects the innocent. It looks out for the interests of the vulnerable. It tries to keep the powerful from eating the weak. Righteous law protects human conscience. So law can be a grace. Well, this is part 2 in my interview of Kristen Wagoner. Kristen is Senior Vice President at Alliance Defending Freedom. Her organization has been involved in the historical cases including Hobby Lobby, Masterpiece Cake Shop, and Arlene's Flowers versus the state of Washington. But put more directly, her nonprofit organization works in the legal arena for religious freedom, freedom of conscience, sanctity of life, and freedom of speech. Kristen has appeared on all manner of big-time national television shows and radio shows, and she loves helping folks understand the reasoning behind what her organization does and why it's biblical to take a stand in the public square. Today's episode, and just so you know, I'm going to start it by replaying about 1 minute of the previous episode so that there'll be some context for what we're talking about. Today's episode will cover the following issues: the implications, maybe unintended implications, the implications of the transgender modification movement, the future of litigation on behalf of religious rights and freedom of speech, and I ask her some personal things about what it's like to argue cases in front of the Supreme Court of the United States. I even ask her what it's like to be openly hated for the sake of Christ. How's it feel to be involved in such landmark historic cases that could well shape the future of the United States? So it gets kind of personal near the end. Oh, and let me say up front, I won't plug the UU show with ads today. So if you're interested in supporting Kristen's organization, the ADF, please know that they really do welcome your prayers. But they also have an ambassador program that helps people get involved in public square matters. And honestly, without the stance of the ADF, shows like mine would be labeled hate speech and shut down. So please go and support to the American Defending Freedom organization at adflegal.org. Again, that's adflegal.org. Here's my ongoing interview with Kristen.
When we're truly living out a robust sense of our religious calling, we're called to serve human dignity, and the law protects human dignity. And that's the purpose, in part, of the law. So it's to ensure that we are protecting freedom. So I just don't buy into this other argument. I think that it's you can go back as far as to Augustine and see that some of the most well-respected philosophers of our age and ages before disagree with that notion.
Yeah. No, I just I want people to think that through again, because it is just so prevalent. And what I'm concerned, Kristen, is that it's growing, it's budding in the evangelical circles. I mean, I'm paying attention and seeing evangelical churches and pastors begin to say, maybe we need to just live and let live, or maybe it's too much force. Maybe there's too much coercion when we want to try to argue these things in the law, in the law courts. And I'm thinking, man, if you don't take a stand, it's not like what is against us is neutral. It has an agenda.
Well, I think even then, the most recent notion, of a gender identity, for example, if you play that out and we don't take a stand, we don't advocate for the truth of God creating male and female and two sexes and that they're binary, the consequences of public policy that eviscerates the distinction between men and women isn't just about someone, an adult who says, I want to transition. Actually, the impact is far greater than that.
Yeah.
It erodes parental rights. We're already seeing cases. We're seeing cases where Christians are no longer eligible to participate as foster care parents and adoptive parents if they don't share those beliefs. We're seeing parents lose potentially their rights to parent their children in these instances because the stance the public schools are taking, and we have seen them unable to get the psychological help that they need for their children. We can look at the impact on Christian education, and whether it's universities or K through 12, and the way the government's using that against them. We can look at the 50 years of gains women have made to be able to equally participate in society, and we will see those go away. How do you keep track of domestic violence statistics if you no longer recognize the difference between men and women?
Yeah.
How do women get to participate equally for scholarship opportunities and small business ventures when there's no difference between men and women? And we have cases right now where we have female athletes in high school where a boy who is running in the girls' track meet has won 10 different championships and displaced 10 different girls in state championships for scholarship opportunities. So there are real consequences to these things that go far beyond just, this idea we're protecting our own interests. We need to protect the common good and to stand for the common good, including those children who will be permanently maimed by hormone blockers and surgical procedures. And what we do know from the studies is that nearly 90% of all kids that have gender confusion, if allowed to live out consistent with their gender, that ends up working itself out. So there are staggering implications to these issues that we're talking about. We can't afford to step back. That's abandoning our neighbor.
No, that is so well put, and I love your passion on that. And again, you just mentioned some implications along the way, and I don't think that live and let live mentality realizes the impact this is going to have on families and on, there's athletic contests, but there's the way that men and women, boys and girls interact with one another in everyday society. When we first moved up here to Boise, there was a local political scientist at Boise State University, and he wrote a peer-reviewed article about how the transgender movement was going to have the unintended effect, or not, of removing parental rights and authority. Now, that seems pretty benign to me, and that seems pretty obvious to me that if you start allowing children to choose their sex apart from the parents' rights, that's going to undermine the family. The faculty at BSU formed and wrote a petition to have him fired for saying something that benign. That's how hot this has become. And again, people unwitting, sometimes even well-meaning Christians do not realize what this is going to do to society, the church, and the families.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it is extremely dangerous, and we've been handling a number of cases on it. We have a Professor Alan Josephson, who was the division chief of the child and adolescent division for psychiatry, and I think it's psychology. And he was essentially discharged because he dared to speak at a Heritage Foundation panel and suggest that we don't know. I think he said something to the effect of, we need to explore before we're going in and having these surgical procedures done, encouraging a child to live at peace with their body and exploring those opportunities before you take such drastic measures. And he lost his job, even though he had perfect marks over the last consecutive years in his performance reviews and things like that.
Yeah.
So this is, the stakes are very high, and it's not just over these issues, even I would say the principles at stake transcend the current cultural debate. Whatever the current cultural issue is, the idea that you can shun, banish, purge, ruin people because of their beliefs on these issues should be frightening to us all. No government should have the power to do that.
Yeah, no, it is. It's it's so wild to watch, and what I keep saying on my podcast is it makes me feel like I'm living in a Salvador Dali painting where the clock is bending and folding over the edge of the table, and the sun is melting down onto the horizon. It's just so bizarre to watch. And this with your involvement in work across the whole church and for the whole church, but the Roman Catholics will argue that this started with the advent of the birth control pill. There would be other Protestants who would say this eventual push for transgendered movement begins and is rooted in feminism. But however we say we got here, I'm watching what I think is a kind of tectonic collision between sexual rights of private people and the religious rights of not only private people but whole institutions. How do you see this playing out? How are the courts tending to rule in favor of religion right now, or where do you think this is headed?
Well, I can't say where it's headed because I don't know. But what I can say is that I am very hopeful. And I'm much more hopeful today than I was even, 4 or 5 years ago. I can say, through the course of our ministry, we've played different roles in Supreme Court victories and 55 Supreme Court wins.
Wow.
But I think that the statistic that I think is most telling is that in the last 8 years, we've won 9 Supreme Court decisions in just the last 8 years. And those have all tended to focus on different aspects of free speech or religious freedom. So we're 9-0 in the last 8 years. We have a 10th case that will be heard October 8th before the court. And we are seeing the U.S. Supreme Court, take a stand. We've also had a tremendously successful last couple of years, whether it's the Hobby Lobby Conestoga Woods cases involving abortifacients, Trinity Lutheran, which is discrimination against churches, and or Masterpiece Cake Shop and the NIFLA decision that came out just this last year. Those are all tremendous victories, and one builds on another. So you'll see future Supreme Court decisions and lower court decisions rely on those holdings. We had an 8th Circuit Court of Appeals win, which is right under the U.S. Supreme Court, about a month ago, which was a tremendous win for Christians in the marketplace to be able to speak and live consistent with their convictions. And we just won last week before the Arizona Supreme Court. We actually just challenged a law in New York City. Do you have time for me to tell you about
Absolutely.
that one?
Yeah, this is fascinating.
Okay. New York City passed this law that was a counseling censorship ban. And basically it said that if someone came to a licensed counselor or psychotherapist and they are an adult patient and said, I'm struggling with same-sex attraction or gender confusion, I want to resolve this, I want to be able to live consistent with my sex, or I want to be able to get married and have children, with someone of the opposite sex, help me work through these things. New York City passed a law that said that would be illegal for adult conversations to happen between psychotherapists and patients to achieve the patient's personal counseling goals.
Wow.
And that the psychotherapist would be fined $10,000 per instance. So the coolest thing was Dr. David Schwartz, he's an Orthodox Jewish psychotherapist, has 50 some years practicing, and he would often, most of his clients are in the Orthodox Jewish community. And he, over the years, has had patients come to him with these, and he simply listens to them. He talks to them. He helps them work through these things. And he's seen some great success stories, and he's seen some things that maybe weren't successful. But he had the courage to challenge that law. And so we filed a lawsuit arguing it's unconstitutional to do that. And we didn't win in court. The reason we didn't win in court was because he had the courage to stand. We argued it in court. We were waiting for the court's decision. And New York City decided to rescind the law because they were so certain they were going to lose. So that law is now no longer enforced. It's gone. Yeah. Just because one counselor was willing to take a stand and take the heat for a moment in time, he got rid of this unconstitutional law that was really coercive in and of itself, and would have harmed many, many patients.
Well, praise God.
I'm hopeful. We're seeing victories. It's just the problem is getting those out into the media. It depends on what your source of media is. If you're just watching TV or reading the New York Times, you're going to be doom and gloom. And certainly we get our teeth kicked in quite often in the lower court levels,
Yeah.
But it's the U.S. Supreme Court that, is going to set the law for the nation. And many times we're starting to see the tides turn and going on offense instead of defense. That's critical. For so long, we just sat back and had to play on the ACLU's turf. They pick the jurisdiction. They pick the vocation. They pick all the facts of the case. They pick who's on the other side. And we need to be more, I think, looking to protect freedom in a more robust way so that we're not always fighting on their turf.
That's so encouraging, man. That's a great report. One of my favorite church leaders, theologians, writers was a Reformed missionary. His name was Leslie Newbegin. And he says that Christians need to take a missional approach like patient revolutionaries, that we're not in it for just one big blow up, and we're not in it so that our soul gets sucked dry. We stay animated, we stay engaged like patient revolutionaries. And I'm sure hearing you talk about how at the local level you guys can get your teeth kicked in, you must be taking a kind of patient revolutionary approach to what you do. And this is a mission for you. This is a calling.
Yes, that certainly, it's been my experience. I do believe that God directed me into this work, and it didn't always look like what I thought it would, but for as long as He has me in it, I'm glad to stay. But there, He's called all of us into different spheres, and He's called all of us to man our stations. And so, if those who are called to academia are failing, that's going to affect all of us. If those that are called to media or entertainment, so many times I feel like we've seen these pockets of sin, we would say, or darkness, and instead of rushing in to bring light, we've rushed out and abandoned them. And I think we've got to get a sense that the pulpit is important, but so is the entertainment industry, and so is art, and so is law, and so is going into the public school system and serving on those school boards. And we've got to bring the light to it rather than bring the light out.
That's fantastic. That's so well put. So I was looking online. You mentioned your own sense of call, and I was reading online, and you were in, was it a summer camp when you felt like the Lord was calling you to be an attorney?
Yeah, that goes way back. I was 12 or 13 years old, and I actually wrote it down, what I felt the Lord was impressing on me at the time. And I don't know why, it happened that way. I know I got into, a fair bit of trouble growing up, but that seemed to really help me know where I was supposed to head, and has just kind of animated my life from that moment on. So I'm certainly grateful for it.
Yeah, to me, those kinds of experiences are memorials that I keep going back to when I find myself in gray seasons or seasons of questioning. And I'm just wondering, because I know this has to get personal for you. You are standing in between tectonic plates that are colliding. Does it ever make you question what you're doing? Do you ever say, wait a minute, Lord, was that really you back then? Why am I in the middle of all this?
I don't know that. There are certainly times where fatigue sets in. Our former founder here at ADF had a great quote, and it was that fatigue makes cowards of us all. And
That's
I've
good.
oftentimes thought of hanging that in our hallway here and outside of my office, because some of the worst decisions we make are the ones that we make when we're most tired. And so I think there are certainly moments of that, but that's actually when that calling has really helped me, is to go back, and I still have it sitting out, and just to go back and read it. And I think, you have one picture in your mind of what that looks like, which at the time, for much of my early career, I assumed that meant I would just, have one win after another. And then had some difficult circumstances with my youngest child, where he almost died, and went in and was talking with a counselor about that. And him and some of my career things came up at the same time, and him saying, I don't know why you thought that this calling would just be one big win after another. Because if you look at the example of Christ, that's not really what he experienced.
Right.
And it's not that, I'm comparing myself to Christ, but we are to model our lives after him. And so the outcome really is up to God, and having that reminder, and we try to emphasize here about keeping our priorities right, running the bases in order. And, so my biggest challenge is, how am I doing at home? How am I doing with my husband and my kids first, and my walk with the Lord, and then what's next after that? And when I can run those bases in order, things are good. And when I get them wrong, which is more often than I'd like to admit, you get that's when you get some setbacks.
Yeah. Well, thank God for that call in your life. And to your last point, there's nothing harder than being a parent. That's just the reality. I don't want to go down that path too far, but there's just nothing harder or more important than being a parent. This morning in my own daily reading, I came across a phrase from that famous theologian named Boltmann, and he said that the what makes Christianity unique, what makes following Jesus Christ unique, is not the effect of Christ's coming, but its strangeness. And you again are on the front line of bringing Christianity and the principles, the values, the dimensions of what it means to follow Christ, to believe in God, to the front line of society. And I'm sure there are times where you're thinking, this is a really strange thing. I'm not having an effect, but you're still trying to stand true. And I want to thank you for being willing to take a stand and live with that kind of tension week in and week out.
Oh, well, thank you. It's as I said, it's a tremendous blessing to get to walk alongside of those in need who are making such courageous stands, and to see God use those situations. Whether it's the campus wins we have, which is over 400, or the Supreme Court wins, or just Jack Phillips in Masterpiece Cake Shop seeing his nephew accept Christ because he saw his uncle take a difficult stand and weather the storm.
Wow.
That's the best thing ever. And I know you've seen it too. I mean, your years in education, and now your voice on the podcast, he's called us to all different areas, and may he go before us and give us the grace to use that voice for his purposes.
Amen. Amen. Okay. So I am a history geek. We just went to Nashville, and I went to these Civil War sites, and I stood there. My whole body was lit up with the reality that I was standing where something amazing happened. I have been to DC, and I've poked my head in the doors of the Supreme Court, and I'm going to sound like a little kid here asking this question, but what is it like to be arguing a case in front of the Supreme Court of the United States?
Oh, It's so exhilarating but unique. I mean, it really is a unique experience because the U.S. Supreme Court is different than any other court. And even though, the courts of appeals, you can have larger panels that you'll argue in front of, or, state Supreme Courts, you'll have 9 justices. There's just something about the integrity, the institutional significance of the court that, it just is weightier. But it is a tremendous experience. For me, in arguing Masterpiece Cake Shop, which was what I argued in December of 2017.
That's the Colorado cake baker.
Yeah, that's the Colorado cake baker. I think what was so significant for me about that was, again, knowing that Jack was there and his sense of history, that in the sense of just this little old, he would say it this way, I wouldn't, but, this little old baker who, graduated from high school, went out and got a job, is not receiving justice, and that the most powerful court, you would say certainly in the United States, but you could make the case in the world in terms of persuasion, is willing to step in on his behalf and to listen to him. And that is an amazing experience. But it was neat. You're so close to the justices. Some things that people don't necessarily know are you are so close to the justices. I mean, you're looking right in eye to eye. It's like a conversation. It's not like a speech, which is different than in many courts. And you can't see all of the justices because the bench is so large. You can't see all 9 of them at any one time, which creates some interesting issues of needing to recognize their voices and things like that. And there's just so much decorum and the rules that you need to follow. So it's an incredible experience. And for us, in that one was significant too, just because of it received a significant amount of attention outside the courtroom as well as we were arguing. Yeah. And we're getting ready for one in October too, where I think you'll see a number of, that one will be controversial as well.
That's Arlene's Flowers case?
No, that's the Harris Funeral Homes case, and it's about whether federal employment law, which prohibits sex discrimination, the ACLU is arguing that sex in the statute actually means or includes gender identity. Okay.
More confusion.
Yes, and and the other side's threatening civil disobedience and just some crazy things outside the courtroom. So that always kind of amps up the atmosphere as you're going into court.
Well, Kristen, in my own life, the people who are my heroes are people of courage, and that doesn't mean that they're always the head of the class or the strongest physical specimen, but I love people across history who can stand up and look the beast in the eye and not flinch. And so I want to say thank you so much for what you do, and thank you so much for coming on my show, because I'm just honored to have you here. I want to ask, how can my listeners help your efforts?
Well, there are many ways that they can help. We have an ambassadors program for those that want to get more involved and connected. That program includes, different ways that you can help. That can be anything from writing an op-ed to helping man a table at an event, keeping an eye on what's going on in the newspaper to help advise us if there are things that we need to be aware of. So there are lots of ways to get involved with the organization, and you can certainly call ADF to find those out, or go to adflegal.org. But I would say even more broadly, getting educated on these issues so that you have the confidence to be able to speak on them at the end of your driveway and in the halls of your children's schools, and most importantly, at your dinner table, which is often the most intimidating place to be. Talking to your teenagers about them. Yep. That is the most important thing we can be doing, because we can defend the right to be able to speak freely, and we can defend the right to have religious freedom. But if there are not people willing to use that right then it's hollow. And as you know, ultimately, we need some spiritual renewal. And we've got to be able to get the church to a place where they're willing to talk about these difficult issues that our society is facing and apply the scriptures to them. And I think that can start in our own homes.
Well, I'll encourage my listeners to pray for you and ADF. We've been talking with Kristen Wagner, Senior Vice President at Alliance Defending Freedom. It was just an absolute privilege to have you on today, and I'm grateful for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. It was a joy to get to connect with you again.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, Kristen.
Okay. Have a great day.
Okay. God bless you. Have a good weekend. Honestly, I was able to interview a cultural rock star with Kristen Wagner. She's not only an expert in her vocation, she's winsome, and still better, she burns brightly for the glory of Christ. If I were to summarize the second half of this interview with her, it would be in 3 parts. A, there's much collateral damage to the transgender movement. Now, if you're interested in more on that, please go and listen to my episode number 34. And in that, I explore the history and the science of transgender issues. There's so much collateral damage going on. B, there's hope. If the recent SCOTUS rulings are indicators, freedom of religion is not going away soon. Praise God, we get to live, worship, openly serve the Christian faith in still an amazing country. And then C, I think it's important to note that God can call people to many different vocations, all of which serve the long run, serve the final vision of Jesus Christ as Lord. So thanks again today for listening, you guys, and please turn your brains on, everybody.